Okay. Seeds of violence. Violence is never far. It is possible to identify the seeds of violence in our everyday thoughts, speech, and actions. We can find these seeds in our own minds, in our attitudes, and in our fears and anxieties about ourselves and others. Thinking itself can be violent, and violent thoughts can lead us to speak and act violently. In this way, the violence in our minds manifests in the world. The daily wars that occur within our thoughts and within our families have everything to do with the wars fought between peoples and nations throughout the world. The conviction that we know the truth and that those who do not share our beliefs are wrong has caused a lot of harm. When we believe something to be the absolute truth, we have become caught in our own views. If we believe, for instance, that Buddhism is the only way to happiness, we may be practicing a kind of violence by discriminating against and excluding those who follow other spiritual paths. When we are caught in our views and are not seeing and understanding in accord with reality, being caught in our views can be very dangerous and block the opportunity for us to gain a deeper wisdom. We usually think of violence and war as an act or event with a definite beginning and a definite end. But when we look into the true nature of war, we see that whether war breaks out or not, the seeds of war are already here. We do not have to wait until war is officially declared to recognize its presence. When the opposing armies have left the battlefield and gone home, it seems that war no longer exists, but that may not really be true. The war may still be there. Although the fighting has ended, hatred and fear are still there in the hearts and minds of the soldiers and the soldiers' fellow citizens. The war is there, yes, and if we look around, we will recognize its many faces: religious intolerance, ethnic hatred, child neglect, racial discrimination, and exploitation of the world's resources. But we also know that the seeds of peace, understanding, and love are there, and that they will grow if we cultivate them. When we recognize the violence that has taken root within us, in the everyday way we think, speak, and act, we can wake up and live in a new way. We can make a strong determination to live mindfully, to live in peace. Shining the light of awareness on the roots of violence within our own hearts and thoughts, we can stop the war where it begins, in our minds. Stopping the war in our minds and in our hearts, we will surely know how to stop the war outside. So ends our reading today. Food for thought. So today we're going to welcome Dave Friedman, who is going to speak with us about canoe trips and the UUA if there's time. So Dave, the floor is yours. I'll ask everyone to please mute yourselves. And then when it's time for questions, we can unmute, but do that now, please.
Okay, we set?
We're set, you're on.
All righty, so that's going to be the reading is going to be a little hard to follow, but maybe I can cheer people up a little bit. This is going to be kind of two segments on the canoe trips. One would go back about 65 years and things I did with the Boy Scout troop. And then I'll talk a little bit about weekend canoe trips that when I was working at Kodak that a bunch of the guys would take, and both are going to be kind of fragmented with little tidbits of numerous incidents that that occurred. Actually, I think through our scoutmaster who knew a guy, I don't know what he was. I think he's probably a lawyer. He was always I call it the uniform trades. He always had a shirt and tie and jacket on. He had a pond, And he had about 6 canoes up there on a rack near his house. And he'd invite us up Saturday mornings because he was a perfectionist, and he wanted us to learn how to canoe well, which he taught us. I mean, we were really good with the learning the J strokes, you know, for turning without any back paddling. And we got to the point where we used to play canoe polo with a ball and canoes and paddles. And that was quite a thing. If you didn't get your arms banged, but he taught us a whole lot of things, including he thought if we were going to go out on big water, we ought to know how to do a in-water rescue. You know, and that's where you would go into if a canoe capsized, you would go over, and, you know, we worked on how to get the people into the boat without tipping your canoe, and then how to bring the other canoe up over the middle of your canoe perpendicularly to drain it, put it back in the water, and get the people back in it. So, you know, so we were pretty skilled. The funny thing I remember was he was dressed up to go somewhere with him, but he was going to show us something first, and he lost his attention a little bit. He tipped his canoe, and here, so here's a guy up to his middle of his chest in water with a cigar, standing there in suit and tie. I'll never forget that that image. We did many multi-day and frequently week to 10-day trips up into the Adirondacks mostly. But you know, so I can remember a number of things. I remember one time we were excuse me, at the Carry-On Racket River, and we had kind of heavy canoes that time, and we didn't remember this, learn about this carry. So we, the way to do it is you take your packs over, and then you come back and bring your boats. But I had this idea we could do them both at one time. So we had our backpacks on, and we put the canoes to the side, and we went like that to bring the canoes up, and kept right on going. We ended up on our side with the canoes bouncing down the hill, so that that didn't work out so well. But also I remember we did a lot. Our scout troop was very active. We did a lot for the district. We did a lot of their work up at their camp, and in exchange we got first dibs on any Army surplus tents or anything they would get. So we had agreed to put up, and they were expanding their pond reservoir, and so there was going to be some work on the dam to raise it a few feet, and concrete work, and then before that we were going to go up and take 15, 20 trees out of an area that would flood a bit more when it did. So I don't remember whether or what happened, but we got up there a week or 10 days later than we said we would, and we found that the concrete work had started, and there was maybe 3 foot of water or so in that area. So the question is what we do. And I don't remember whether the adults drove us up and dropped us, or whether we had adults around. I can't imagine an adult approving what I decided to do. I was the lead scout on that project. And so what we did was we took 2 canoes, each had a guy in the front, guy in the back to paddle and stabilize, and a guy in the middle with a chainsaw. And we canoed out, and I don't know how we got these 12, 15, 20 trees down without hitting any canoes, because you'd reach out and cut a V in on the other side of the tree and then cut into it and drop it the other way from the canoe. Anyway, we took the trees down at water level, chopped them up, dragged them back with the canoes to the shore, you know, and stacked them up. So that was one of our odd projects, but somehow we all managed to survive it. I remember one time too, we were out on one of the lakes. I don't remember if it was George or probably Champlain. And we ran into a windstorm and the water was getting high, even though our gear was all in these heavy Army waterproof duffel bags that we'd gotten in the past. We decided we better pull in. So we pulled into this island. And it was fairly late in the afternoon. It was mid to late afternoon. So by the time the storm lifted, it didn't make a lot of sense to go back out. We couldn't reach our destination lean-to anyway. So we decided to camp there. So we're all set up and a motorboat comes around and comes in and older guy gets out and he says, you realize you're on private land. I own this island. We said, yeah. No, we hadn't thought about it. We told him what happened. He said, all right, well, be careful, and clean up well when you leave, but you can stay overnight. It looks like it's too late to go out anyway. So anyway, we continued, and after dinner, it was almost dark. We hear this motorboat. Guys coming back in again. I said, I wonder what this is about. And he came in with a couple of half gallons of ice cream, and bowls and spoons and stuff. And he stayed with us for about an hour. So it was really, it was an unusual and rather nice experience. The other thing we did is our scoutmaster was a pretty skilled guy, and he taught us a lot of skills. If like reflector oven cooking, we'd make biscuits from Bisquick. We also so we could, if we beat the bears to berries, and if we found any berry bushes, we'd have blueberry biscuits and stuff. And he could do a whole lot of things that way. Another thing I remember, we were driving. I don't know why we had to go back for something. There were, I think, 5 of us and the scoutmaster in his 56 Chevy station wagon and a couple canoes up top. And we're on this dirt road in the back, sort of like mostly a 1-lane road with occasional pull-offs in case you had to pass a car. And we were going a little faster than he would usually go. I don't remember why. Some car was coming the other way. And the first thing the other driver saw was the upside down canoes. So he panicked and pulled over a little bit, and the side dragged him off the road. So we stopped and talked to the guy, and scoutmaster said, all right, go into the woods and find a couple of trees that are about this diameter, that are, where we can take about a 10-foot section out of them and bring 2 of them back. So the guys did that. And we ended up putting the lever in under the car. We stood below it, and 3 guys on each log. And believe it or not, we actually lifted that car back up onto the road. A little physics demonstration in leverage, that was it. The other thing I remember is, for some reason, my scoutmaster always carried a pistol on the trip. And what he would always do whenever we camped is he just hang it on a branch. Generally had his 22. It's a nice long, like a 10-inch barrel light. I shot that gun many times. One time he actually forgot and brought his 357 Magnum. I shot that one once, and the kick was so bad I never went near a gun like that again. But anyway, so we're camping and we hear this shots and shouting and singing, upriver, and this boat's coming down. So my scoutmaster strapped his pistol on and went up to the edge of and his kids were shooting this shotgun up in the air. And when they saw him and they kind of put it down, pulled into the shore where we were. And one of the guys went to get out and he kind of tripped with a shotgun and put a blast through the bottom of his rowboat. So now these guys were panicked. What are they going to tell their dad? Well, they hit a rock. Well, the rock don't put like 8 holes in your boat, and they also don't have powder marks on them. They're not protruding out. So anyway, we brought the boat up and we sort of pounded everything flat and used duct tape on both sides of it. Kind of got the boat seaworthy and sent them on their way. And I don't know what happened when they got back to their dad, how they even got the shotgun or whatever. But that was one of the odder experiences that we had. Moving on to the Kodak groups tended to take regular weekend, once in a while, a 3-day trip. We were all over the place. I remember that we were up the Rideau River one time, I don't know, maybe 60 miles above the border or something like that. It was pretty because they were having a flower contest at each lock as to what, and then they would pick which one had the most attractive flower bed. It was pretty nice, except we pulled up to one lot and the warden came out and said, "Where's your permit?" I said, "Permit? Yeah, you need a permit to canoe up here." I said, "Oh, really? We didn't know that. We're from the state." "All right, well, you can go get one." I said, "Where do you do that?" And he said, "Kingston, it's 60 miles downriver." I said, "What?" So we were kind of like 16 of us. We sort of stood around belligerently. The guy finally, "All right, well, next time be smarter." He let us go. But I think I got set up on this one. Guys went up early on a Friday afternoon. Frequently, we could get out a couple hours early, but I had a meeting, couldn't. So I had another guy, and I had 2 canoes. I had a station wagon. I had, I think, 11 cases of beer, case of soda, quarter keg on ice in the back of the station wagon. I pull up to the border at Thousand Islands. And the guys pull in, and the guy says, "Where are you heading?" I told him. He said, "Got any alcoholic beverages?" I said, "Yeah, we have some beer for personal consumption." So he goes and he looks in the back of the wagon. He says, "Well, how long are you going to be in Canada?" I said, 3 days. He said, "Well, you better start drinking now because none of that's coming back with you." So that was one of the, but on some of our Adirondack trips, one of the times one of the guys went up early. He thought he would do a pig roast at the starting point, small pig. So he was up there the day before the rest of us. And the day we were supposed to drive up, the patrols happened to drive in to check on things, and they saw this and said, "Well, you're not allowed to have a fire here." The guy said, "What am I supposed to do? I got this thing on the rotisserie, Well, apparently, he told us later, the guy says, "How long are you going to be here?" I said, "We'll take off in the boats tomorrow or the next day." I said, "All right, well, I'll come back then, and none of this better be here." So we got away with that one. Well, one night we were up there and we went, dropped our gear and then went down to town for a couple of beers. And we made the mistake of not insisting everybody go back in the same car that came. So somehow, we get back to camp and I was supposed to be up early the next morning it was my breakfast crew day, and got up and I said to the guys, breakfast, it's interesting, there's sleeping bag next to me in the tent that's hasn't been opened, just rolled up. So I don't know, we're talking about it. About 15 minutes later, this guy comes walking into the camp. We left him in the men's room. So this was like 6 miles away. So he was walking all night. He had mosquito bites, and he wasn't too happy, actually. He said it was so dark, he walked in the middle of the road mostly because he could see the occasional yellow lines with the curves. So so anyway, we waited a few hours and let him get a little sleep. There was another time we were in an area that was near where there was like a big wooden aqueduct kind of thing, all bolted together with spikes. And apparently some other group was there, and some kid kind of slipped, and he went down, and the spike went up his rear end. And so he was in pretty bad shape. And I remember we had a couple guys haul him out to the road and probably flag somebody down, because this was before cell phones, to take him into, I think they got the state police to come and take him on in. But that was one of our odder things. Another thing that I remember, we'd collect all these beer cans in the boat, and we got a lot of peanuts. We would buy 20, 30 pound bags of peanuts and divide them up. We eat them, we just throw the shells in the bottom of the boat. So I remember one time we pulled into a public beach, I think it was Long Lake. So we're carrying these canoes over to the garbage cans, dumping beer cans in the garbage cans, and then sweeping the peanut shells to the middle of the boat, and then tipping the boat over so everything dumps in it. And I'll never forget the looks of the people. What are these guys doing? But I remember one time too, we were just lost my thought there. We were back in the woods. I think it was Cedar River Flow. We were back. This is a place that it was a flow channel for logs, and one of the lumber companies, one of the paper mill companies owned this property, and they'd let us go back in there and canoe it was pretty nice back in there because there was never anybody in there, and some fairly long runs of creeks and streams. That was kind of nice. So back in there one day, the dark was at a campfire, and we hear a vehicle coming in, and he comes in, and it's 3 game wardens, and they said, gee, can we hang out with you in your camp for a bit? He said, sure, what's up? And they said, well, there's a bunch of deer jacking going on, and we think with a tip that might be happening tonight, so we're gonna hide out for the guys. And sure enough, apparently that did happen, because I remember because we went over to where this incident happened. I remember the warden with one guy who was still holding his rifle. And the warden went over and took his rifle from him, went over to a forked tree and just bent the barrel, handed the guy his gun back. But apparently, I don't know, I looked it up on the internet. I think that's like an $800 fine for deer jacking if you're caught. So I'm sure these 3 guys, it was a pretty substantial thing for them. Remember too, a time when we had a campsite. It was fairly well hidden. It was tucked in. It was just kind of nice, but apparently it was hidden enough that the deer didn't notice it. And one morning, a deer came running right through thing. It went right through our fire, actually, knocked over the frying pans. We lost the bacon and everything we were cooking. that was kind of an unusual thing. Because I remember one of the guys having a hold of the deer by the antler, trying to, the other side, trying to make sure, because those things can butt you pretty hard, and kind of just steering the deer off to the side. So we kind of had a bunch of different little things other than the canoeing. The canoeing itself was always wonderful, except for black fly season. And again, from a past training, I knew how to wear long sleeve things, you know, take off out onto the river, Racket River or something, get out away from the shore, and then stand in a boat and strip down to your swimsuit and shirt off and that, and then sit down again to canoe without capsizing. So that's what we would do. We would, because the black flies didn't seem to come out over the water much, so we would prepare that way for. But you really had to make sure your tents had netting, and netting was always closed. And though there were little kinds of things that could go through the netting, I remember, I don't know what they were called, but we dealt with some. Maybe the last one on that topic, was we were coming back in time, and we decided up Watertown area to gas up. We pulled in, one guy went in to use the restroom, and the door bolt, something happened, and I think it was the plate that the door things come through, tipped out. And this is a steel frame door in a concrete block wall, and we could not get that open. So we went around back to the window, and it had bars on it. So we're figuring, so we're talking to the owner, oh, I'll deal with it. But he kept going out and pumping gas. So we were there like 20 minutes. This guy still hasn't come over to help us. And the guy in there is getting a little more frantic. So finally we told him, why don't you got enough room to run a few feet and just throw your shoulder into the door, and maybe that plate will bend. So he does that, and we hear this noise. And the entire door, steel door and frame, tore out of the concrete block. At which point the gas station owner was having a fit. We just ran to the cars and took off, because we figured you'd be calling the police, and we didn't want to be anywhere near there. But I'll not forget that sound of the door coming out. That was probably the one time we did some arrestable damage. But I should probably switch off denominational work I've done. I started out on the district board. I think I started out as treasurer, and then I was on the board. And then I think I got off because Linda was going to be president, and I didn't think I should be holding a leadership position at the same time. And I was asked, they had a treasurer who died suddenly in their home. So I got a quick call, would I be willing to take over on short notice so they could get somebody up to speed? So it was a matter, I remember we had to wait, somebody had to visit a house with a relative, found out that they were keeping most of their stuff on a computer. So we had to figure out, we got somebody was skilled enough to find the stuff on the computer and put stuff on a disk. There was disks back in those days, so that we could take over from where they were. So that was my second stint as treasurer that I didn't expect to do. The annual program fund for the UUA, I was district chair for 4 years, and then they asked me would I do another 4 as regional chair. At that time I had regions, so it was us, Ohio, Kentucky, one other place. So I was responsible for getting church pledges for that idle team. And then Suzanne McNamara, who was a UUA trustee, she retired. She tried to get me to succeed her. Really wasn't interested. I turned her down. But I was, one time I was in Flint, Michigan when Lisa was there, and I think it was, I don't remember, Ginny Porter, who was a UA monitor, who lived in that area. And for some reason, she and my daughter, Lisa and Linda, were together, and they sort of jumped me one night. They said something to the effect of, "You have all these opinions on how the UUA ought to do things. Why don't you step up, run for the board, and do some of these things?" Well, that kind of, yeah, it was a hard logic to defeat. So anyway, I did run, and I was on finance for 5 years. I was on audit for 5 years. And my favorite was at that time, there were trustees on the ministerial fellowship committee, and I spent 2 years doing that. And that was very inspiring, just to see the young talent that was coming through the ministerial credentialing systems. Audit, we did a number of things that were actually kind of interesting. We designed and caused the UUA to have a whistleblower policy, which they did not have previously, and which we developed for them. We worked on their conflict of interest policies. And so we did things other than just the financial numbers auditing, which were generally done by an outside auditing firm anyway. Our job was to kind of hire the firm and to sort of take in their input and present to the full board if they had recommendations. I spent 6 years of the 8 on the board doing work as the UUA was looking to go to policy governance. Barbara, of course, knows a lot more about this than I do, but what kind of I learned in that area was that you got, at least at the UUA, we got almost as much out of the process as we did out of the results, because it caused us to reflect on how everything was done, and what ought to be done, and where we would have accountability. And that's the thing I like most about policy governance is that it does provide an accountability, and it does tie what the executives do back to some mission-based and some board accountability. Because I had discovered in my many travels for the UUA that, that if a minister wants to run things, a minister runs things. And so if that's not done in a system, then the accountability kind of falls apart. But under policy governance, you still can, minister has a lot of authority, but it's not freelanced authority. So that was productive. I was involved in the group that investigated the move to Farnsworth Street from Beacon Hill, and I was, in fact, I'd gone over there one time in a noon-hour walk, and managed through, there was a door open down by the garage. I managed to get into the basement, walk toward the building myself before we bought it. And that was a big, what had happened, quick story there was UUA wasn't looking, Peter Morales wasn't looking for anything different, but he was called by Rabbinical College in Newton, I think, that was supposedly going to go out of business and sell its property, and was the EUA interested? Well, they took a look at it, and I think they decided it wasn't the right move. But Harlan Lippert, who was the executive vice at that time, said, you know, this has caused us to think, how much space do we need, which they determined was about 100,000 square feet. Why don't we design up what would be an ideal headquarters in 100,000 square feet, which could then be used to measure anything that might come along that we might be interested in looking at. Because Beacon Hill was a problem. For one thing, we were split on 3 buildings with lousy internet connection, a lot of restrictions on the hill, so things you could do to modify things. 3 buildings, substandard HVAC, a whole lot of, and then on top of that, you know, it had connections for Unitarians, but not for Universalists. And there was the question, you know, Peter once asked us, are we a religious denomination or a museum? You know, with all the painting, you know, what are we tied to here? And what is the value of maintaining this Unitarians up on high on the hill above the common area of Boston, which is more where the Universalists were. So anyway, we kind of decided that we would take a look, and this Farnsworth opportunity came along. It was a 6-story building. It had 3 stories of tenants, long-term tenants that lease those floors, and then the 3 vacant floors, which the UUA took over. And our Tim Brennan, who was our board treasurer and chief financial operating officer, figured out, he said, you know, it's a lot more, it's twice what we can afford, what we're planning on spending, but what you could do is take the 3 floors that are rented and you know, buy half of it out of endowment and half of it the normal way, and then say that the rental that we were getting was about the same percentage as our return on investment in the endowment fund. So why don't we use that as part of our endowment income? So on that basis, we were able to do the stretch and purchase that building. So that, you know, and, you know, so we just took Harlan's floor print and just looked like it would fit into that property perfectly. And that's how we moved there. I should probably close out to move towards, you know, questions. I did, one of the other things I did is I worked on Susan Frederick Gray's campaign. I was so impressed with her after the Phoenix General Assembly and the demonstrations and her courage against Sheriff Arpaio out there, that I just figured she was a perfect candidate. So that was another area I worked on, the nomination. So I had, you know, I probably spent half of my adult life in some aspect of UUA stuff, either at the church, the district, or the denomination. So now I'm mostly retired. I'm doing commission on appraisal, where we're looking at some structural things in the UUA, but that's a much lower commitment in terms of time and effort. But let me close out and give you like 15 minutes for some questions if they have any.
Hey, well, Dave, thank you. I think both parts of your talk show the variety of your endeavors.
Yeah, we did some, yeah, we were wild when we were young, and then we age into more appropriateness maybe. Or...
Well, it was great. Thank you so much. So if anybody has questions for Dave or comments, could you please use the reaction button and raise your hand that way so that I'll be able to see anyone that wants to ask a question. Laura, unmute yourself. We lost Laura?
You had something in the chat about what deer jacking is. So
Maybe that's, oh, all right, let's go to Howie. And Howie, unmute yourself. Maybe Laura will show back up.
Yeah, Dave maybe wanted to explain what deer jacking was from the chat, had a question about that.
yeah, so that would be using a very bright flashlight kind of thing, lantern or something, to shine a light at a deer, which would, the deer would freeze in position. And so then they would do that for illegal hunting. First of all, you shouldn't be hunting at night. And second of all, it's illegal to use lights to try and freeze deer. That's what it was. They called it jacking. So they would go in there, and first of all, they're hunting out of season, and then they're freezing deer with lights to make the hunting easier.
Yeah. My question, Dave, was, do you have a professional background that made you qualified or interested in doing all the work and finance and governance and auditing and so on?
Exactly the opposite. I had a physics and math background, knew nothing about some of these things, but learned along the way. No, I did not. And there were a couple of times, and that's one of the reasons, oh, I can't think of her name. She moved to Amherst, Massachusetts. Sterling Weaver Church had a gal who did part-time, what do they call it? She was a financial professional, I forget, the CPA, and she did some work on his high-end clients, and he suggested it, and she joined the church, and he suggested maybe she would help me tighten up some things in the area, because he and I knew that I didn't have this background. And so I was a little busy when she contacted me, and I said, well, why don't you just take a look at our procedures first and see what you think. Shared her all the stuff with her, and then we'll get together and that. And it turned out she became an assistant. She was one who suggested we hire an auditing firm. You know, it's at first not to look at the numbers, but to look at our procedures. And so that greatly professionalized, you know, our church operation. And I learned a bit from that experience, and, you know, carried that with me. Then I learned a lot from watching how the UUA audited. So, you know, it was learning along the way, but this gal whose name escapes me is really the reason why the church got on a good footing, and then they've carried that much further. And then the people who followed me have had a lot more financial experience. I worked a lot with Steve Brown, who was my assistant. Then he became the treasurer. He asked me to stay on part of it so he could focus on writing a procedures manual. And Steve was pretty good, and he took the next steps also, and he worked more, and he had done a lot of the financials for the law organization that he was a lawyer in. So things just kept getting better and better at church.
Thanks.
Other questions or?
I had a question
Yeah, there you're
about,
back. We lost you somehow.
sorry, I was trying to unmute myself, which was easier said than done. I knew that the mothership was in Boston, but I've not heard any conversation about the building, and that's fascinating to me. So does the UUA still own that building? Do they take up just the 3 floors? Is there still investment with the renters?
We bought the building for $48 million, I think. It's down in the Innovation District. We figured that even though it's theoretically a flood zone, It's next door to the Children's Museum. There's a big Marriott down there. There's a hospital in that area. We figured Boston would keep that area walled and safe. So it put us, not only that, there's an internet high-speed band down that whole street. So where we had crappy connections up on Beacon Hill, this was really modernized. It's a modern office building. We had looked at some other things. Harlan Limpert thought that, maybe taking 100,000 square foot floor on an office building downtown might be a possibility, but Peter Morales wanted UUA to have its own building where it could hang its own flag out. So, this gives us a place where you can walk up a couple steps and go into the first floor, which has got like a greeting area. It's got the bookstore, and then there's modern elevators and offices above. And that was all gutted. Those 3 floors were gutted down, so it had modern windows put in, but just the internal beams. The bathrooms are finished, so you could configure it any way you wanted. And then there was a tenant on the 3 floors, and there's a parking garage underneath. I think it'll take 20 cars or something. So it was basically what happened with Tim Brennan, our treasurer, had some connections with some real estate people who actually went out and looked for a building for us. And they came and said, this is ideal. And this trick of using 24 million of the endowment and having a rental return go back into the budget as endowment return was made it financially feasible. So they have a very nice position. It's on that south thing, just over the bridge. I can walk. I walk it from South Station. You can go one more subway stop, and there's a subway stop a few hundred feet from the building. And there's a nice little restaurant. It's a nice area. It's very up to date. When we went from there, and then to boot, the state decided to buy some of the properties that were next to us when we were up on Beacon Hill, next to the State House. And they got, to their surprise, $37 million. We'd estimated that maybe we could get the 24 back from selling the old property. They got $37 million for selling the properties up on Beacon Hill. So the whole thing worked out to be quite a plus for the UUA.
Barb DeLay, I'll put in the chat that it is a platinum green building, which is the latest green tech when it was renovated. So that's sort of living up to our mission.
Yeah, it was an expensive renovation, but on the other hand, they got so much more out of selling the old property. It was a no-brainer to go that way.
Great. Does anyone else have any questions or comments for Dave? No? How about am I missing somebody?
Annette?
Oh, Anne?
Oh, this is Annette.
Yeah. You're muted,
Dave,
Anne.
My concern about the Farnsworth building was the flooding. So, I mean, I know that it isn't a flooding zone, so that it sounds great, but that's what seems scary to me.
Well, we studied that pretty carefully. We had a meeting. We did a floodplain analysis. I was on that team. By the time to go up in the building, there's a rise of about 5 feet. So the parking garage obviously is a risk for flooding, but the chances of getting substantially over 5 foot of water, that was pretty slim, and that would have meant several feet of water in the Children's Museum and in the hospital there. So we didn't think the city was going to avoid spending on flood walls for that, but we thought the 5 foot was adequate protection. But we did have, it's not a zero risk, but the parking garage is obviously under under risk. That could flood, but
Thank you. Barb, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to share with people that David enjoys a wonderful reputation with those that he has worked with in the past. And for anyone, when we get back to our new normal, whatever that is, I would encourage people to call and just drop into the building. It really is a stunningly beautiful building with a lot of flexible space. It's been designed so that it can be, you know, you're not moving walls, but the way it's set up, you can put up those temporary walls and make bigger and larger spaces. And as I said, it was, I don't remember what the top rating is, but that rating was almost unattainable when we were looking at it locally to do the kind of, because it was so expensive. But that building has all of the latest technology at the time that they renovated, right?
yeah,
So-
it's got a broadcast studio, you know, conference room where they can easily channel things out on it. You know, it's a well designed. You know, the UUA has so many connections too in Boston to professional firms that can do all kinds of things like design, evaluate, this, you know.
Right,
So
right.
I got a lot of help. None of this was designed by us amateurs.
Right.
We amateurs.
So go visit it if you're in the Boston area. It's not hard to get to, as David says. And the last time I was there, I didn't have an appointment. I just showed up and somebody sort of escorted me for a while. This was before I was on the board, and then kind of walked me through. So I would really encourage you to consider doing that. It's pretty amazing. And those rental people, we have very long-term rentals, and they paid some serious bucks during COVID and helped to support our organization because you all negotiated some seriously lucrative leases. So we never have to even blink about the mortgage payment.
Great, thank you. Mary, you have your hand up, and I think that'll just about 11, so we'll let Mary finish it out.
Well, I just have a few announcements, if that's okay.
Sure.
It's been great fun to hear what you've had to say this morning, Dave. I loved the references to the Adirondacks and to the fun you had with your scout troop. But moving on to thinking about Elder Tree this spring, we have received 19 responses from the poll we put out. So I'd like to encourage people to respond to those 2 questions. I'll send the poll out again. So if you've already responded, you can just delete it. And the second thing is that we would really appreciate having people volunteer to read for the rest of the spring. We have one more volunteer for next week, but then we need readings for the following sessions this spring. So if you would either respond to the email link that I send out or to any one of the elder buddies, that would be very helpful. So thanks.
Great. Thank you, Mary. So I know my reading was depressing, and that probably enthused Mary to make that announcement. But war is war. David, thank you so much. It was a lot of fun to hear your stories. I know everybody appreciated it, and I certainly enjoyed it. Next week, Bill Fugit will be meeting with us and talking about church history and the building, all of which he knows very well. So that should be interesting. If you have questions about history or the building, be sure to bring those with you. And Barb said his sense of humor, which I'm guessing meant Dave and not Bill, but I'm not sure. So thank you for coming, everyone. I'm going to blow out the chalice. And we will look forward to seeing you next week. Take good care and have a good week.